You know, there's a sound a heart makes when it breaks that nobody else can hear. It's not a sharp crack like a piece of china dropped on the floor. No, it's a softer sound, more like the slow, weary sigh of a deflating balloon. It's the sound of all the air going out of you, all the hope, all the fight. I heard that sound inside my own chest, clear as day, the afternoon my son, my David, said those words to me. "We're done taking care of you, Mom." He said it right here, in this very living room. I was sitting in my armchair, the one with the floral print that's worn thin in the seat, from all the years of me sitting in it, knitting, reading, watching the world go by out that window. He was standing over by the fireplace, one hand on the mantelpiece, not looking at me, but at a photograph of his father. He said it to the photograph, I think, more than to me, as if he was asking for permission or maybe forgiveness. "We're done taking care of you, Mom," he repeated, his voice a little firmer this time, a little colder. It's too much. For me, for Sarah, we have our own lives, our own family to think about. We can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" I wanted to ask. "What exactly is it that I've been forcing you to do? Was it the doctor's appointments? I only ever asked for a ride twice when the car was in the shop. Was it the odd meal I shared at your table? I always brought a pie. Was it my presence at your children's school plays, beaming with a pride so fierce it hurt? I sat in the back. I never embarrassed them." But the words wouldn't come. They were stuck somewhere behind that soft, sighing sound in my chest. All I could do was look at him, at the man my little boy had become. He had his father's jawline, set and stubborn, but he had my eyes. Or he used to. Right then, they looked like someone else's eyes entirely. "We've found a place," he continued, finally turning to me. His face was a mask of what I suppose he thought was resolve, but I could see the flicker of guilt underneath, a tiny flame he was trying desperately to smother. "It's a good place, Mom, a senior community. They have activities, people your own age. You won't have to worry about the stairs or the garden or anything. It's for the best." For the best. Three little words that have justified a million small heartbreaks throughout history. They're the words you use when you're doing something for yourself, but you need to dress it up to look like you're doing it for the other person. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. What would have been the point? The decision had been made. I could see it in the way Sarah was hovering in the doorway, her arms crossed tight over her chest, not saying a word. It had been discussed, debated, and decided upon in the quiet of their home over glasses of wine after the kids were in bed. My fate had been sealed without my input. The mother, the grandmother, had become a problem to be solved. So I just nodded, a slow, weary nod that made my old neck ache. "All right, David," I whispered, my voice sounding thin and reedy, like a ghost of itself. He looked almost disappointed that I hadn't put up a fight. I think a part of him wanted the drama, the confrontation, to justify the harshness of his decree. My quiet acceptance was somehow worse. It left him alone with his guilt. "We'll help you pack," Sarah said from the doorway, her arms offering a brittle kind of kindness. "We can start this weekend?" "No," I said, a little more sharply than I intended. I softened my tone. "Thank you, dear, but no. I'll pack my own things. I'd like to do it myself." They exchanged a look, one of those married couple looks that speaks volumes in a silent language I wasn't privy to. A look that probably said, "Let her have this. It's the last bit of control she'll have." They left soon after, with promises to call tomorrow and a list of brochures for the community left on the coffee table. The house fell silent, profoundly, achingly silent. This house that had echoed with the sounds of David's childhood laughter, with my husband Arthur's deep rumbling jokes, with the chaotic, beautiful noise of a life lived fully, now it was just a collection of rooms, holding its breath. I sat in my chair for a long, long time, watching the afternoon light fade into evening, painting the walls in shades of gold and then gray. I thought about my life. I thought about Arthur. Oh, Arthur. He was the love of my life, my rock. He'd been gone for 10 years, but the space he left behind never got any smaller. He was a big man, in every sense of the word. Big heart, big laugh, big dreams. He'd have known what to say to David. He'd have put a hand on his shoulder and said something that would have made everything right again, without ever raising his voice. But Arthur wasn't here. It was just me. And I was tired, so very tired. Tired of being a burden. Tired of the quiet. Tired of trying to fit into the edges of my son's life like a piece of furniture that's too big for the new room it's been moved into. But as I sat there in the growing dark, a strange thing happened. That soft, sighing sound of my breaking heart, it stopped. And in the quiet that followed, a different sound began to emerge. It was a small, stubborn little sound, a feeling more than a noise. It was the feeling of a latch clicking open. An idea, wild and terrifying and utterly thrilling, began to form in the back of my mind. David thought I was packing for a one-way trip to a quiet, beige-colored room in a building full of strangers. He had my life all mapped out for me, a straight, narrow, and gently declining path to the end. But he had no idea. No idea at all. I stood up, my knees protesting, but a new energy was coursing through me, faint but undeniable. I walked over to the hall closet and pulled out my old, large suitcase, the one Arthur and I used for our trips. It was dusty, tucked away behind winter coats and forgotten board games. I wiped the dust off with my sleeve, the plastic feeling familiar and comforting under my fingers. I was going to pack my bags, just as my son had instructed. But I wasn't packing for the place he had in mind. I was packing for a different destination entirely. A place I hadn't seen in 50 years. A place where a different version of me was waiting. A version I thought I'd buried a long, long time ago. I set the suitcase on my bed, the same bed Arthur and I had shared for 42 years, and the click of the latches was the loudest sound in the house. It was a sound of finality, but also a sound of beginning. Each click was a lock opening, not closing. The faded floral pattern of the suitcase seemed to wink at me in the dim light from the bedside lamp, a relic from a time when my world was so much bigger than this house, this town, this slowly shrinking life. My hands trembled as I opened it. The inside still smelled faintly of lavender and old paper, the ghost of sachets I'd tucked in there a lifetime ago. The first thing I did wasn't practical. I didn't reach for my sensible slacks or my warmest sweaters. No, I knelt down, my old bones complaining against the hardwood floor, and I reached under the bed. My fingers brushed against dust bunnies and the smooth surface of a storage box until they found what they were looking for, a smaller, leather-covered case, scarred and soft with age. I pulled it out, my heart doing a funny little skip that felt both painful and joyful. I laid it on the bed beside the open suitcase and undid the little brass clasps. Inside, nestled against faded blue velvet, was my past. My real past. Not the one I'd lived as David's mother or Arthur's wife, but the one I'd lived just for me. There was a stack of black and white photographs, their edges curling. On top was a picture of a girl with long, dark hair whipping in the wind, standing on a rocky coastline, a sketchbook tucked under her arm. She was smiling, a wide, fearless, almost challenging smile. That girl was me. Eleanor. Not Mom, not Mrs. Whitaker. Eleanor. I traced the face of that girl with a trembling finger. Who were you? So full of fire, so sure the world was just waiting for you to paint it. Arthur was the only one who ever really knew her. He'd met her, fallen in love with her, and had spent a lifetime gently, lovingly, helping her build a different kind of masterpiece, a family, a home. And I had never for a single second regretted that choice. It was a different kind of creation, one made of lullabies and packed lunches and worn-out knees on little boys' jeans. But sitting here now in this silent house, with my son's words still hanging in the air, I realized that in building that life, I had let the other Eleanor, the girl with the sketchbook, fade away until she was just a ghost in a photograph. I lifted the photograph, and beneath it, my breath caught in my throat. There, wrapped in tissue paper, was a sea glass pendant. It was a simple thing, a piece of green glass worn smooth and opaque by decades of ocean waves, hung on a simple silver chain. Arthur had given it to me on our honeymoon, on a wild, wind-swept beach in Maine. "It's like you, Ellie," he'd whispered, his lips close to my ear, as he fastened the clasp. Beautiful, unique, and shaped by something powerful and wild. I hadn't worn it in years. It felt like it belonged to another woman, a woman who walked on beaches with her love, not to a grandmother packing a suitcase for a retirement home. But as I held the cool, smooth glass in my palm, that wild, terrifying idea from the living room solidified. It became a plan. David thought I was diminished. He saw the gray hair, the slow walk, the need for reading glasses, and he saw an ending. He didn't see that inside this aging body, the heart of that girl on the coastline was still beating, faint but persistent. He had no idea that the place I was headed wasn't a sterile, safe community. He was sending his mother away, but he was unleashing Eleanor. I started to pack, but not the way Sarah would have packed for me. She would have chosen the sensible things, the wash-and-wear fabrics, the comfortable shoes for walking on paved paths. I started pulling things from the back of my closet. A thick, cable-knit sweater the color of the Atlantic on a stormy day, a pair of sturdy, worn-in walking boots, my old waxed canvas jacket that still smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. I packed my watercolor set, the good one I'd saved for a someday that never came. I packed the leather-bound journal Arthur had given me, its pages blank, waiting for a story. And then I did something that felt both radical and deeply right. I went to the little desk in the corner, the one that had been Arthur's, and I opened the bottom drawer. Beneath a stack of old tax returns and insurance papers, there was a sealed envelope, my emergency fund. For years, whenever I had a little extra from the household budget or from selling my jams at the church fair, I'd tucked it away here. A secret, even from Arthur. A little nest egg I'd always told myself was for a rainy day. Well, the sky hadn't just clouded over, it had opened up. This was my deluge. I counted it, my hands shaking. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Enough for a bus ticket and for a few weeks somewhere else. I folded the money into my purse, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was madness. A woman of 73 doesn't run away from home. She doesn't cash in her secret savings and buy a one-way ticket to a memory. She goes gracefully, quietly, into that good night of bingo and early bird dinners. But as I looked at the determined face of the girl in the photograph, still lying on my bed, I knew I couldn't do graceful. Not anymore. David had handed me an ending, and I was going to use it to find a beginning. I finished packing just as the first hint of dawn began to blush at the edges of the sky. The suitcase was full, zipped up, standing by the front door like a soldier ready for deployment. I made a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, waiting for the sun to rise, waiting for my son to call. He would, I knew. He'd call to confirm the moving van, to give me a time, to soothe his conscience with practicalities, and when he did, I would answer. I would listen. And I would let him believe that his plan was proceeding perfectly. He thought he was in control. He thought he knew where his mother was headed. But he had no idea. The phone rang, just as I knew it would, its shrill sound cutting through the quiet of the morning. The sun was fully up now, casting long, hopeful fingers of light across the kitchen linoleum. I let it ring 3 times, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my tea, letting the warmth of it steady my nerves. I had to be calm. I had to sound like the mother he expected to hear, a little sad, a little resigned, but ultimately compliant. I picked up the receiver. "Hello, David." "Mom, you're up early." His voice was brisk, businesslike, the same tone he used when discussing quarterly reports. I could picture him, phone tucked between his shoulder and ear, tying his tie in the mirror, his mind already halfway out the door to his important job, his important life. "I couldn't sleep much," I said, and that, at least, was the truth. A pause. I could hear the faint sounds of his household in the background, my granddaughter Lily laughing, the clatter of a cereal bowl, the sounds of a life moving forward. "Right. Well, I just wanted to confirm everything for today. The movers will be there at 1 o'clock to get the furniture and the boxes you've packed for the new place. Sarah and I will come by around 3 to pick you up and take you over, get you settled in." The new place. He made it sound like a promotion. I closed my eyes, picturing the brochures left on the coffee table. The gardens, they called it. There were pictures of smiling, silver-haired couples playing bridge, walking on manicured paths past generic flower beds. It looked peaceful. It looked soulless. It looked like a beautiful, well-appointed waiting room. "That sounds fine, David," I said, my voice carefully neutral. Another pause, longer this time. I could feel his guilt through the phone line, a thick, uncomfortable static. "Mom, you know this is for the best, right? It's not safe for you here all alone anymore. Those stairs. And last winter when you slipped on the ice, Sarah and we worry." And there it was. The justification, wrapped in the language of love and concern. It was a shield he held up, not just for me, but for himself. He was a good son. Good sons worried. Good sons made the tough, practical decisions. I understood the script. I was supposed to reassure him now. I was supposed to say, "I know, son, you're right. Thank you for taking such good care of me." I looked at my suitcase by the door, a silent rebel in the muted morning light. I thought of the sea glass pendant, now tucked safely in my pocket, its cool weight a secret anchor. "I know you worry, David," I said softly. It was all I could give him. It wasn't an agreement. It was just an acknowledgement of his reality. It seemed to be enough.
He let out a breath I hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Okay, good. Okay, we'll see you at 3 then. Do you need us to bring you anything? A coffee, something for lunch?" "No, dear," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I have everything I need right here." We said our goodbyes and I hung up the phone, the click of the receiver settling into the finality of the morning. I had everything I needed, my suitcase, my secret fund, and a destination that had been blooming in my mind all night, a name that had gone from a whisper to a shout in the quiet chambers of my heart: Saltwood Cove. It was a small fishing village on the coast of Maine, the place Arthur and I had gone for our honeymoon all those years ago. We'd stayed in a little ramshackle inn run by a widow named Maeve. We'd eaten lobster rolls on the pier, sketched the lighthouse, and walked for miles on the stony beach, our hands linked, our future stretching out before us like the endless ocean. Arthur had found the sea glass for me there. We'd always talked about going back. "One day, Ellie," he'd say, "when the kids are grown and we're old and gray, we'll rent that same room and watch the storms roll in." But one day never came. Life, children, responsibilities, they all got in the way of one day. But now, one day was today. David was gifting me with a future I didn't want, so I was claiming a past I'd always longed for. I wasn't running away to relive my honeymoon. That was impossible without Arthur. I was running away to find the piece of myself I'd left there, the girl who believed in storms, in sea glass, and the power of her own 2 hands to create a life. The hours between that phone call and the arrival of the movers passed in a strange, dreamlike state. I moved through the house, not as its mistress, but as a curator of a museum that was about to close forever. I touched the faded wallpaper in the hallway, remembering the countless times I'd measured David's height against it, marking his growth with a pencil and a date. I ran my hand over the smooth wood of the banister, worn down by the passage of small, eager hands. I was saying goodbye, but it wasn't a sad goodbye. It was a grateful one. This house had been a good home. It had held my love, my laughter, my grief, but it was time to let it go. It was no longer my home. It was just a house full of memories, and memories are light. You can carry them with you. When the movers came, 2 burly, kind-faced young men, I directed them with a calm I didn't know I possessed. "That table stays. The china cabinet can go into storage." I pointed to the few boxes I'd packed with linens and kitchenware for the gardens. "Those are the ones." They moved with efficient grace, dismantling my life and loading it into the belly of their large, impersonal truck. They didn't ask questions. They were used to these scenes, these transitions. By the time they pulled away, the house was an echo chamber. The furniture was gone, leaving pale, ghostly outlines on the floors where it had stood for decades. My footsteps echoed as I walked from room to empty room. It should have felt like a loss, a defeat. But standing there in the hollowed-out shell with the dust motes dancing in the sunlight, I felt something else entirely. I felt light, unburdened. The weight of a lifetime of possessions, of expectations, of a role I had outgrown was gone. All that was left was me, my suitcase, and a wide-open future. I picked up my purse, my fingers checking for the reassuring crinkle of the envelope inside. I slipped my hand into my pocket, feeling the smooth, cool surface of the sea glass. Then I walked to the front door, without looking back. I pulled it closed behind me, the sound of the latch clicking into place the final note of the old song. I stood on the front porch for a moment, breathing in the air. It smelled of cut grass and possibility. I had a bus to catch, a coast to find, a self to rediscover. And my son, my dear practical son, had no idea that the mother he thought he was safely tucking away was about to set sail on the greatest adventure of her life.
The bus station was a world of its own. A humming, diesel-scented limbo filled with the murmur of strangers and the tinny announcements crackling over the loudspeaker. I stood there for a moment, clutching the handle of my suitcase, feeling profoundly out of place. Everyone else seemed to have a purpose, a destination etched on their faces. A young soldier nervously checked his watch. A mother jiggled a crying baby on her hip. And then there was me, Eleanor Whitaker, 73 years old, runaway. I bought my ticket from a man in a booth who barely looked up from his newspaper. "One way to Portland, Maine," I said, my voice sounding small. He grunted, slid the ticket under the scratched plexiglass, and took my cash. The transaction felt illicit, like I was purchasing a new identity. In a way, I suppose I was. Finding the correct bay, I joined the small queue of people waiting to board. I felt their eyes on me. Curious, pitying, maybe. An old woman traveling alone. They probably thought I was going to visit family, or returning from a visit. They couldn't possibly imagine the truth. I kept my head down, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. What was I doing? This was insanity. I should call David right now, tell him there'd been a mistake, that I'd wait at the empty house for him to come and rescue me from my own foolishness. But then my fingers found the sea glass in my pocket again, and I thought of Arthur's face, beaming with pride, the day I'd sold my first painting at a little local art show. It was just a small watercolor of the old oak tree in our backyard, but he'd framed it himself and hung it in his office. My wife, the artist, he'd tell anyone who would listen. He never saw my art as a hobby. He saw it as a part of me, as essential as breathing. When he died, that part of me had gone dormant, like a garden under frost. David, in his well-meaning way, had simply assumed the garden was dead. I handed my ticket to the driver, a weary-looking man with kind eyes. "Big trip?" he asked, stowing my suitcase in the compartment below. "You could say that," I replied, managing a small smile. I found a window seat halfway down the bus, away from most of the other passengers. I needed to watch the world go by. I needed to see the familiar streets of my town, the grocery store where I'd shopped for 50 years, the library where I'd taken David for story time, the park where Arthur had pushed him on the swings. All of it fall away. As the bus rumbled to life and pulled out of the station, I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and watched my whole life recede into the past. It was a painful, beautiful unraveling. There was the church where we'd been married. There was the school David had attended. Each landmark was a stitch in the tapestry of my life. And now the bus was pulling the thread, unraveling the picture until all that was left was the loose, trailing end that I now held in my hands. I didn't cry. I just watched, mesmerized as the town gave way to suburbs, then to open highway, the landscape opening up like a promise. The hum of the tires on the asphalt was a lullaby. The tension of the last 24 hours began to seep from my shoulders, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. I must have drifted off because, the next thing I knew, a change in the light against my eyelids woke me. I opened my eyes and gasped softly. The world outside my window had transformed. The flat inland fields were gone, replaced by rolling hills and, in the distance, a brilliant, impossible slash of blue. The ocean. I hadn't seen the ocean in over a decade. David and Sarah preferred lake vacations, all organized activities and calm, predictable waters. But this was wild. This was alive. As the bus wound its way closer, the scent somehow seeped into the air-conditioned bus. A crisp, salty, kelpy smell that bypassed my memory and went straight to my soul. It was the smell of Arthur's jacket after our walks on the beach. It was the smell of freedom. The bus didn't go all the way to Saltwood Cove. I knew that. It ended in Portland. From there, it would be a smaller, local bus. And then, well, I hadn't thought that far ahead. I hadn't thought about how I'd get from the bus stop to the cove itself, or where I would stay. The grand, rebellious plan was suddenly crashing into the hard rocks of logistics. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of my resolve. What had I been thinking? I was an old woman with a suitcase and a dream. This wasn't a charming adventure. It was a recipe for disaster. The bus pulled into Portland Terminal, a bustling, chaotic place that was a world away from the quiet station I'd left. People rushed everywhere, a river of humanity that I had to navigate. I felt small and fragile, a leaf caught in a current. I retrieved my suitcase, its weight suddenly feeling like an anchor, and found a quiet plastic seat in a corner. I needed a moment. I needed to think. This was the point of no return. I could still call David. He would be angry, terrified, but he would come. Or I could get a taxi to the retirement community, show up as planned, and slip back into the role of the docile mother. It would be the easy thing, the safe thing. I looked around at the rushing crowds, their faces set in determined lines. No one had time for a lost old lady. The fear was a cold stone in my stomach. And then I heard it. Not a sound, but a voice. Arthur's voice, clear as day in my memory from one of our last conversations. He'd been so weak, his hand barely holding mine, but his eyes were bright. "Ellie," he'd whispered, "don't you ever let the world make you small. You've got a giant inside you. Promise me you won't forget her." I had forgotten her. For 10 years, I'd let her sleep. But David's words had been an alarm clock, a harsh, cruel one, but an alarm clock nonetheless. I stood up, my knees protesting, but my spine straight. I hefted my suitcase and walked to the information desk. "Excuse me," I said, my voice stronger now. "I need to get to Saltwood Cove." The woman behind the counter gave me a skeptical look. "Saltwood? That's a ways out. The local bus goes to Kennebunkport, but you'd need to get a cab from there out to the cove. It's the off-season, though. Not sure what's even open out there." "That's quite all right. I just need to get to Kennebunkport." An hour later, I was on a smaller, rattling bus that wound its way through picturesque coastal towns. The sky was beginning to soften into the golds and pinks of evening when I got off at the stop in Kennebunkport. The air was colder here, sharp with salt and the coming night. I stood on the sidewalk, my suitcase beside me, and looked around. The town was charming, but it was not my destination. My destination was 5 miles down a winding coastal road. I saw a taxi idling nearby. This was it. The final leg. I walked over, my boots making a firm sound on the pavement. The driver, a young man with a beard, rolled down his window. "Where to, ma'am?" I took a deep breath, the cold, salty air filling my lungs. "Saltwood Cove. Do you know if there's still an inn there? The Saltwood Inn?" He scratched his beard. "The old place? Yeah, it's still there. Think it's still run by the same old lady. Maeve, I think her name is. You sure that's where you want to go? Not much there this time of year." A wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy. It was still there. Maeve was still there. "I'm sure," I said, and I smiled, a real, genuine smile for the first time in what felt like years. That's exactly where I want to go. The taxi ride was a journey into a deepening memory. The road, narrow and winding, was etched into the side of the coastline, and with every turn, another fragment of the past shook loose. There was the bend where Arthur had pulled the car over so we could watch a pod of seals basking on the rocks. There was the old, gnarled pine tree that leaned precariously over the cliff, a silent sentinel I remembered sketching all those years ago. The light was fading fast now, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange,
and the ocean below was a vast, shifting expanse of indigo and silver. It was more beautiful, more wild than I had remembered. My heart wasn't pounding with fear anymore. It was thrumming with a low, steady anticipation. The taxi finally slowed, turning off the main road onto a crushed-shell driveway that crunched under the tires. And there it was, the Saltwood Inn. It wasn't a grand hotel, never had been. It was a large, shingled Cape Cod-style house, weathered to a soft, silvery gray by decades of salt wind and sea spray. The shutters were a faded navy blue, and a light glowed warmly in one of the downstairs windows, a beacon against the encroaching twilight. It looked a little more worn, a little more slumped into the earth, like an old friend who had settled comfortably into their age. The sign, a piece of carved wood swinging from a post, creaked in the wind. It was still here. It was real. I paid the driver, my hands trembling only slightly, and he wished me good luck before turning the car around and disappearing back the way we came. The sound of the engine faded, replaced by the relentless, rhythmic crash of waves on the shore somewhere below the bluff. The silence that rushed in was immense, but it wasn't the empty silence of my old house. This was a living silence, filled with the breath of the ocean and the whisper of the seagrass. I was alone, truly alone, in a way I had never been. I stood there for a long minute, just breathing it in, letting the wild, salt-kissed air cleanse the last of the stagnant sorrow from my lungs. Then, I picked up my suitcase and walked to the front door. It was painted a cheerful, if chipped, red. I lifted the heavy brass knocker, shaped like a mermaid, and let it fall. The sound seemed to get swallowed by the vastness of the night. For a moment, nothing happened. Panic flickered again. What if it was closed? What if Maeve was gone? What if this was all a terrible mistake? Then I heard the soft thud of footsteps, and the door swung open. The woman who stood there was not the robust, laughing Maeve I remembered. This woman was small and bird-like, her back slightly stooped, her hair a cloud of brilliant white. She wore a thick hand-knitted cardigan and held a book in one hand, a finger marking her page. But her eyes were the same, a piercing, intelligent blue that took me in with one swift, assessing glance. "Yes?" she said, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. My carefully rehearsed words deserted me. I just stood there, an old woman on her doorstep with a suitcase, probably looking completely lost. I'm sorry to bother you so late. I was wondering if you might have a room?" She didn't smile. Her gaze was unwavering. "It's the off-season, we're not really open." "I know," I said, my voice gaining a little strength from desperation. "It's just, I stayed here once. A long time ago. My husband and I. On our honeymoon." Something shifted in her sharp blue eyes. A flicker of recognition, or perhaps just curiosity. "What year?" 1968. I said softly. "October. You had a black dog named Captain, and you served us chowder in bowls you'd made yourself." A long, silent moment passed. The wind whistled softly around the corner of the house. Then a slow, deep smile transformed her wrinkled face, carving lines of warmth and humor around her eyes and mouth. It was Maeve. "The young lovers from Boston," she said, her voice warming considerably. "The artist. You sketched the lighthouse in the rain. Your husband bought you a piece of sea glass from my little shelf of treasures." Tears sprang to my eyes, hot and sudden. She remembered. After all these years, in this vast and busy world, she remembered us. "His name was Arthur," I whispered. Maeve's smile softened. "And you're Eleanor." She stepped back, pulling the door wide open. A wave of warmth and the smell of baking bread and wood smoke poured out, an embrace more welcoming than any words. "Well, don't just stand there letting the cold in, Eleanor. Bring your suitcase. It seems you've had a long journey." I stepped over the threshold, and as the door closed behind me, shutting out the vast dark night, I felt something inside me, something that had been clenched tight for years, finally begin to unspool. I wasn't in a retirement community. I wasn't a burden.
I was a guest. I was Eleanor, the artist, remembered. And for the first time since David had spoken those devastating words, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Maeve led me through a small, cozy parlor where a fire crackled merrily in a stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on walls lined with bookshelves and dotted with local art. It was exactly as I remembered, yet more so. Every surface held a seashell, a piece of driftwood, a stack of well-loved books. It wasn't decorated, it was lived in, a collection of a life spent by the sea. She didn't lead me to a front desk, there wasn't one. Instead, she gestured for me to leave my suitcase by the stairs, a narrow, winding affair with a polished wooden banister, and ushered me towards the kitchen. "You'll be hungry after your travels," she stated, not asked. "The chowder's gone, but I have bread fresh from the oven and some good sharp cheese. And tea. Or something stronger if you need it." I followed her, feeling like I was in a dream. This wasn't how things were done. There was no check-in process, no credit card swipe, no rules about breakfast times. It was as if I had come to visit a slightly eccentric aunt. The kitchen was the heart of the house, warm and steamy, with a giant, old-fashioned stove and a scarred wooden table littered with the crumbs of her own solitary dinner. "Tea would be wonderful," I said, my voice still a little shaky from the emotional whiplash of the day. She nodded, filling a kettle and placing it on the stove before cutting 2 thick slices of dark, crusty bread. She moved with a slow, deliberate economy, every motion purposeful. She didn't fill the silence with chatter, and for that, I was profoundly grateful. The only sounds were the hiss of the gas flame, the wind buffeting the window pane, and the distant, constant percussion of the waves. I sat at the table, my hands folded in my lap, simply absorbing the peace of it. She set a mug of steaming tea in front of me, along with the bread and cheese and a knife. "So, Eleanor, you've come back. Alone." It wasn't a prying question. It was an observation, an opening. And looking into her wise, unshocked eyes, I found the whole story tumbling out. I hadn't planned to tell anyone, but the words spilled forth, softened by the warmth of the room and the sheer relief of being seen. I told her about Arthur, about the 10 long years without him. I told her about David, my sweet boy who had become a stern, practical man. I told her about the armchair, the words, "We're done taking care of you, Mom," the brochures for the gardens. I told her about the secret savings, the bus, the terror, and the thrilling certainty that had propelled me here. She listened, her gaze never leaving my face, occasionally taking a slow sip of her tea. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes, didn't gasp in horror or cluck in sympathy. She just listened, as if my story was a tide coming in, something natural and inevitable. When I finished, the only sound was the wind and the waves. I felt drained, hollowed out, but clean, like a storm had passed through me and washed everything away.
Maeve was quiet for a long time, looking into the depths of her mug. Then she looked up, and her blue eyes were like the ocean outside, deep, knowing, and utterly calm. "Children," she said, and the single word was filled with a lifetime of understanding. "They think they know the whole story because they know the last chapter. They see the wrinkled cover and the bent spine, and they think the book is finished. They don't understand that a woman is a library, not a pamphlet." A sob caught in my throat, but it was a sob of recognition, of validation. That was it. Exactly that. David saw the bent spine. He didn't see the countless, vibrant pages inside. "He loves you," she continued, matter-of-factly, "but love can be a clumsy thing in young hands. They think care is a location, a safe beige room with handrails. They don't understand that for a soul like yours, care is—" She gestured around her, at the wild night outside the window, at the fire-warmed room, at the simple bread and cheese. This, the freedom to feel the wind, the silence to hear your own thoughts again. Tears streamed down my face now, silent and warm. She saw me. She saw the library, not the pamphlet. "Your room is the same one," she said, as if we had simply been discussing the weather. "The one at the top of the stairs facing the sea. The lock is a little stubborn. You have to jiggle the key. No television. The Wi-Fi is spotty, a protest of mine against the modern world. The bathroom is down the hall. Breakfast is when I make it, usually around 7. She pushed her chair back and stood up.
You look dead on your feet. Go on up. We can talk more in the morning. I was too overwhelmed to speak. I just nodded, wiping my tears with the back of my hand. I picked up my suitcase and made my way up the creaking stairs. The hallway was dark, but a small nightlight glowed from an outlet. I found the door she mentioned. I fumbled with the old-fashioned key, jiggling it until the lock gave way with a satisfying clunk. The room was small, simple, and perfect. A white iron bedstead with a thick, puffy quilt, a washstand with a porcelain pitcher and bowl, a single wooden chair by the window. And the window itself, a large, multi-paned vista looking out onto the black, star-strewn sky and the moonlit silver of the raging ocean below. I left my suitcase by the door and went to the window, pressing my hands against the cold glass. The force of the sea, even from up here, vibrated through the house, through the floor, through the soles of my feet. It was a powerful, primal heartbeat. I didn't unpack. I just took off my shoes and my cardigan and slipped under the heavy quilt. The sheets were cold and smelled faintly of lavender and fresh air. I lay there in the dark listening to the symphony of the storm and the sea, a wild, chaotic lullaby after a lifetime of quiet streets and silent houses. I thought of David, probably frantic by now, trying to call the empty house. A pang of maternal guilt, sharp and instinctive, shot through me. But it was quickly followed by a new, unfamiliar feeling. A sense of rightness. This was where I was meant to be. Not in a beige room, but here, in a room that shook with the fury and the beauty of the natural world. My son thought he had sent his mother away to be cared for, but he had actually sent her home to be remade.
The storm raged through the night, a magnificent, terrifying orchestra of wind and water, and I slept through it all, a deep, dreamless sleep, as if my soul had been waiting for such a powerful lullaby. I woke not to an alarm, or the sound of traffic, or the oppressive silence of my old house, but to a different kind of quiet. It was the quiet that comes after, a world hushed and washed clean. A brilliant, low morning sun streamed through the window, painting a rectangle of gold on the wide plank floorboards. The air in the room was crisp and carried the clean, wet scent of salt and pine. I lay there for a moment, disoriented, the events of the previous day rushing back, not as a panic, but as a profound and settled fact. I was here, in Saltwood Cove. I had done it. I got out of bed, my joints complaining only slightly, and went to the window. The sight stole my breath. The ocean, which had been a roaring, invisible force in the dark, was now a vast, sparkling expanse of sapphire blue, still churning with whitecaps from the spent storm. Gulls wheeled and cried against the clear sky. It was a view that demanded a deep breath, and I took one, filling my lungs until they ached. Downstairs, the smell of coffee and frying bacon guided me to the kitchen. Maeve was at the stove, flipping pancakes. She glanced over her shoulder. "You found the storm to your liking, then? You slept like the dead. I checked on you once." She said it so casually, this admission of caretaking. "It was the best sleep I've had in years," I said, and it was the absolute truth. We ate breakfast at the sun-drenched kitchen table, a simple, comfortable silence between us. It wasn't the lonely silence of eating alone, nor the fraught silence of meals with David and Sarah, where I could feel their unspoken worries hanging in the air like humidity. This was just quiet companionship. After we finished, Maeve waved away my offer to help with the dishes. "The tide's going out," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "The best sea glass is found after a storm. The beach will be littered with it. Go on. It's why you're here, isn't it?" It was as if she could see straight into the core of me. I pulled on my wax jacket and my sturdy boots, the ones I had packed with a wild hope, and stepped out the back door of the inn. A path, overgrown with beach grass and rosa rugosa, wound down a steep bluff to the cove below. The air was so clean, it felt like drinking cold water. With each step down the path, the sound of the waves grew louder, a rhythmic, soothing crash and hiss. And then I was there. The beach was not sand, but millions of smooth gray stones that clattered and shifted under my feet. It stretched in a wide, rocky crescent, sheltered by high, dramatic headlands on either side. And just as Maeve had promised, the storm had left its treasures. Pieces of seaweed,
bleached white driftwood shaped like bones, and scattered amidst the stones, glints of color. My heart leapt. I bent down, my knees cracking in protest, and picked up my first piece. It was a milky white, small and perfectly oval, worn smooth as silk. The next was a fragment of cobalt blue, from a medicine bottle perhaps, 100 years old. I walked slowly, my head down, my gaze scanning the wet stones, my pockets growing heavier. It was a meditation, a prayer. The vastness of the ocean, the cry of the gulls, the sheer physical act of searching and finding, it emptied my mind of everything. There was no David, no gardens, no guilt. There was only the hunt for beauty in the wreckage. I found a large piece of driftwood, smoothed by the sea to a satin finish, and sat down, letting the weak winter sun warm my face. I pulled out the sea glass pendant from my pocket, holding it next to the new pieces I'd collected. The green of Arthur's gift was darker, more profound, but the new pieces shared the same quality. They were all broken things, made beautiful by time and turbulence. I felt a sudden, startling kinship with them. A shadow fell over me. I looked up, startled. A man was standing a few feet away, an old black Labrador retriever panting at his side. He was perhaps in his late 60s, with a weathered, kind face under a wool cap, and he wore the practical clothes of a local fisherman. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said, his voice a pleasant rumble. "Just saw you from up on the path. You're new to the cove." "I am," I said, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm staying at the inn, just for a little while." He nodded, looking out at the water. "Maeve's place? Good. It's the best spot. That's a fine piece of glass you've got there." He gestured to the pendant in my hand. "My husband gave it to me, a long time ago. We honeymooned here." A knowing look crossed his face. "Ah, then you're not new. You're a returner. Welcome back." He tipped his cap. "I'm John. That's Barnaby. We live in the little gray house up on the ridge. If you need anything, or just want a conversation, we're usually around." And with that, he gave a small smile and continued on his walk, the old dog lumbering happily after him. It was so simple, so easy. No introductions laden with my history as a widow, a mother, a burden. Just a woman on a beach, a returner. I looked down at the collection of sea glass in my lap, the old and the new, and felt a sense of belonging so sharp it was almost painful. This was what care felt like. It wasn't being managed, it was being seen, and then being left alone to simply be. The world, in its own quiet, stubborn way, was beginning to take care of me. I sat on that log until my fingers were numb with cold, until the sun had climbed high enough to lose its morning gentleness. The encounter with John and his dog had been a brief, pleasant interruption, but it had left me with a profound sense of peace. I was a returner, not a runaway, not a problem, but a person who had come back to a place that held a piece of her story. The label fit me perfectly, settling on my shoulders like a well-worn sweater. When I finally trudged back up the path to the inn, my pockets heavy with sea glass and my soul feeling light, Maeve was sitting on the wide front porch, shelling peas into a ceramic bowl. She didn't look up as I approached, but said, "Find what you were looking for?" I sank into the rocking chair beside her, the old wood groaning in protest. "I think I found a piece of myself I'd forgotten was there," I said, the words surprising me with their truth. I emptied my pockets, laying my treasures on the small table between us, the milky white, the cobalt blue, a piece of rare sea-worn brick red, and a soft, honey-colored amber. Maeve picked up the amber piece, holding it to the light. "The storm always gives back what it takes," she mused. "It scours the seabed, churns up the old wrecks, and delivers the past right to your feet." She looked at me, her eyes crinkling. "It's not just sea glass it churns up, is it?" I shook my head, no longer surprised by her perception. "No, it's not." I told her about the sketchbook I'd packed, the one with the blank pages. I haven't drawn in 10 years, not since Arthur died. It felt like the color had gone out of the world. What was the point? And now? I looked out at the dazzling blue of the cove, at the way the sunlight caught the caps, at the dark, dramatic green of the pines on the headland. Now, the world seems full of color again, almost too much. It's overwhelming. Then start small, she said, going back to her peas. Don't try to paint the whole ocean. Just paint one wave, or better yet, just that piece of sea glass in your hand. Remember the shape of it. Remember how the light passes through it. Her words were a permission slip. After a simple lunch of soup and the bread she'd baked that morning, I took my sketchbook and my old, slightly dried-out watercolor set out to the porch. My hands felt clumsy and foreign, the pencil an awkward weight between my fingers. The first few lines I drew were tentative, shaky. I was trying to draw the ocean, just as she'd warned me not to. It was a mess, a child's scroll. I tore the page out, crumpled it, and felt a familiar surge of frustration. You see? A critical voice inside me whispered, the one that had been silent for 10 years, but now returned with a vengeance. You've lost it. It's gone. You're just an old woman playing at being an artist. I almost put the book away. I almost gave in. But then I looked at the sea glass pendant, still lying on the table where I'd left it. I picked it up, feeling its cool, smooth surface. Start small. I took a deep breath, selected a new page, and instead of looking at the vast horizon, I looked only at the piece of cobalt blue glass in my palm. I studied its irregular shape, the way one edge was thinner, almost translucent, while the core was a deep, solid blue. I began to draw, not the idea of the glass, but the specific, unique contours of this piece. The lines came more easily this time. They were still imperfect, my hand still unsteady, but they were honest. I wasn't trying to create a masterpiece. I was just trying to see, to truly see, this one small, beautiful thing. I mixed a dab of ultramarine blue with a touch of Payne's gray, added water, and tentatively touched the brush to the paper. The color bloomed, a wet, brilliant blue that soaked into the thirsty paper. It was just a wash of color, a simple shape. But as I painted, something unlocked inside me. The critical voice faded, replaced by a quiet, focused hum of concentration. I was not an old woman anymore. I was not a mother or a widow. I was a pair of eyes, a hand, a connection between a beautiful object and a blank page. The world, with all its complications and heartaches, shrunk down to the size of a piece of sea glass. And in that small, manageable world, I found I was still capable of creating something. It wasn't about talent anymore. It was about presence. It was about paying attention. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I was fully, completely present. The days began to fall into a gentle, healing rhythm, each one shaped not by the clock, but by the light and the tide. I would wake with the sun, eat breakfast with Maeve in her warm, bread-scented kitchen, and then, armed with my sketchbook and a pocket for treasures, I would make my pilgrimage down to the cove. The beach became my studio, my church, my therapist's couch. Some mornings I would just walk, my boots crunching on the stones, my gaze fixed on the endless horizon until the vastness of it quieted the endless chatter in my mind. Other mornings I would find my driftwood log and draw, a single twisted piece of seaweed, the intricate architecture of a gull's feather, the way the water foamed around a particular dark rock. I was rediscovering the world through the tip of a pencil, and in doing so, I was rediscovering myself. The Eleanor who was emerging here on this windy beach was quieter, more observant, less prone to worry. She wasn't concerned with what was for dinner or whether she was being a bother. She was concerned with the way the mist clung to the headlands at dawn and the specific green of the moss on the north side of the rocks. One afternoon, as I was carefully adding a wash of gray to a sketch of the lighthouse in the distance, I heard the familiar crunch of footsteps. It was John, with Barnaby plodding faithfully beside him. This time, he paused. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked, his voice respectful. A flutter of nerves went through me. My art had been such a private thing for so long, shared only with Arthur. But I nodded and held up the sketchbook. He studied it for a long moment, his weathered face serious. He didn't offer empty praise. He pointed a thick, work-roughened finger at the lighthouse. "You've got the lean of it just right," he said. "Most folks draw it straight on, but the foundation's settled on the seaward side. It has a stoop, like an old man facing into the wind. You saw that." His observation, so specific and true, meant more to me than any generic compliment ever could. It was a craftsman's appreciation for another's attention to detail. "It has character," I said softly. "That it does," he agreed. He sat down on the stones beside my log, not too close, giving me space. Barnaby collapsed at his feet with a contented sigh. "My father helped maintain that light when I was a boy, before it was automated. We row out there sometimes. Felt like the edge of the world."
We talked then, not as strangers, but as two people sharing a bench on the same coastline of life. He told me about growing up in the cove, about the fishing trade that had dwindled, about the stubborn, quiet people who chose to stay. I found myself telling him more about Arthur, not with the sharp grief of recent loss, but with the warm, settled fondness of a cherished memory. I told him about Arthur's terrible, wonderful dad jokes, and how he could never keep a straight face while telling them. John laughed, a deep, genuine sound that was carried away on the wind. He didn't ask why I was here alone. He didn't need to. He seemed to understand that the sea was its own reason. When he stood to leave, brushing the pebbles from his trousers, he said, "There's a storm coming in tonight. A big one. You'll hear it. Don't be afraid of it. It's just the ocean reminding us who's in charge." That night, the storm arrived as promised. It was fiercer than the first, a true nor'easter that screamed against the shingles and made the old inn groan in its bones. But this time, I wasn't a passive listener. I built up the fire in the parlor while Maeve read in her chair, and I brought out my watercolors. I didn't try to paint the room or the fire. I tried to paint the sound of the storm. I used slashes of dark indigo and charcoal gray, touches of furious white, trying to capture the wild, untamable energy that was shaking the very foundations of the house. It was a mess, a wonderful, chaotic, exhilarating mess. I was not just enduring the storm, I was conversing with it, answering its fury with my own small, creative burst of energy. Later, as I lay in bed feeling the house tremble, I thought of David. I pictured him in his quiet, insulated home, the storm just a weather report on the evening news. He would be worried sick by now. He would have called the police, filed a missing persons report. The maternal part of me ached for his fear. But a stronger, newer part of me knew that my silence was a necessary storm he had to weather himself. He had to sit in the uncertainty, in the consequence of his words. He had to feel what it was like to not know where his mother was, to be forced to wonder, to truly see her not as a responsibility, but as a person who could vanish. It was a harsh lesson, perhaps, but a vital one. For the first time, I wasn't just running from something, I was waiting for something. I was waiting for the storm to do its work on both of us. The morning after the nor'easter dawned clear and violently bright, the sky a hard, brilliant blue that hurt the eyes. The cove was transformed again, littered with even more spectacular wreckage from the deep. It was on that morning, as I was picking my way through a tangled knot of rope and seaweed, that I saw it, a flash of color unlike any other. Not the soft milkiness of white, nor the common cobalt of bottled glass. This was a deep, vibrant, almost emerald green. My heart skipped a beat. I knelt, my knees sinking into the wet, cold stones, and carefully pried it from its bed of pebbles. It was a piece of sea glass, but it was in a class of its own. It was the size of a large thumbprint, and it was a perfect teardrop shape, as if it had been deliberately crafted. The color was a profound, jewel-like green, and it was so deeply translucent that when I held it up to the sun, light glowed through it, illuminating tiny trapped bubbles from a century past. It was Arthur's green, the exact same shade as the pendant he'd given me. I clutched it in my palm, the cold of it seeping into my skin, and a feeling of such intense, sweet connection washed over me that the breath left my body. It felt like a message. A wink from the universe, or from him. I see you. You're on the right path. I couldn't sketch that day. I just sat on my log,
turning the green teardrop over and over in my hand, feeling a peace so deep it was like sinking into a warm bath. When I finally walked back to the inn, the treasure held tight in my fist, I felt like I was floating. Maeve was in the garden, tying up the storm-battered remains of her delphiniums. She took one look at my face and smiled. "You found something," she said. I opened my hand. She leaned in, her eyes widening a fraction. "Well now," she breathed. "That's a once-in-a-lifetime find. That's from a ship's lantern, I'd wager. 19th century. The storm. It must have finally broken it loose from the old wreck out past the headland." She looked from the glass to my face, her expression unreadable. "It found its way to you." That afternoon, the spell was broken. The modern world, which I had so effectively held at bay, finally reached into my sanctuary. I was in the parlor, attempting to sketch the green teardrop, trying to capture its impossible color, when the old rotary phone on the wall jangled, a harsh, insistent sound. Maeve answered it from the kitchen. I could only hear her side of the conversation. "Saltwood Inn?" "Yes, she is." "Who, may I ask, is calling?" The words landed in the quiet room like stones. On his way. The real world was coming for me. The confrontation I had both dreaded and, in a strange way, known was inevitable, was now hours away. The serene artist on the beach vanished, and in her place was the mother, the guilty party, the problem. I looked down at the green sea glass, its color suddenly seeming less like a blessing and more like a farewell gift. The cozy room felt like a trap. The hours after Maeve delivered her message seemed to contract and expand, each minute stretching into an eternity of dread, yet the afternoon vanished with terrifying speed. The simple act of sketching was impossible. My hand was unsteady, my mind a chaotic jumble of rehearsed speeches and raw fear. I put the green sea glass carefully in the small ceramic bowl on my bedside table, a talisman I feared had lost its power. I paced the length of my small room, the floorboards creaking a familiar complaint under my restless feet. I tried to tidy what was already tidy, to fold clothes that were already folded. I was a prisoner awaiting a verdict, and the judge was my own child. Maeve, sensing my turmoil, said little. She simply brought me a cup of tea at one point, placing it on the parlor table beside my untouched sketchbook. "The truth doesn't need a defense, Eleanor," she said quietly. "It just needs to be spoken." Then she left me to my thoughts, which felt less like thoughts and more like a swarm of angry bees. As the brilliant blue of the sky began to soften into the gold of late afternoon, I found I couldn't stand the confines of the house any longer. The walls were closing in. I needed air. I pulled on my jacket and walked out onto the front porch, bracing myself against the post, my gaze fixed on the crushed shell driveway, the only road in. The wind had calmed to a whisper, and the ocean below was a placid, breathing sheet of gold. The world was impossibly beautiful, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. And then I saw it. A cloud of dust in the distance, followed by the glint of a sunroof. A car. A modern, sleek, utterly out-of-place SUV navigating the rough coastal road. My breath hitched. My knees felt weak. It was him. The car pulled into the driveway, the crunch of its tires on the shells sounding obscenely loud in the quiet cove. The engine cut, and for a moment, nothing happened. The driver's door opened, and David got out. He looked haggard. His face was pale, his usually crisp shirt was wrinkled, and his eyes held a wild, frantic energy that was so unlike his usual controlled composure. He stared at the inn, at the peeling paint and the creaking sign, and then his eyes found me on the porch. The look on his face was a complicated tapestry of relief, fury, and utter bewilderment. "Mom!" His voice was a strangled thing, torn between a shout and a whisper. He strode towards the porch, not with the purposeful walk of a man coming to collect his mother, but with the unsteady gait of someone who had been lost and had finally, desperately found a landmark. "My God, Mom, what are you doing here? What is this place?" He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, his eyes scanning me up and down as if checking for injuries. "Are you okay? Are you hurt? We've been sick with worry. The police, I filed a report. I thought. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, his composure cracking. I thought something terrible had happened to you. I stood my ground, my hand still on the post for support. I'm fine, David. My voice was quieter than I wanted it to be, but it was steady. Fine? He repeated, the word exploding from him. You're fine? You disappear. You don't answer your phone. You leave your house empty with the movers showing up. You have me thinking you've been in a ditch somewhere for days and you're fine? He took a step up the porch, his voice rising. What is this, Mom? Some kind of protest? Was this your plan? To run away to some shack by the sea, to teach me a lesson? The word shack felt like a slap. I saw the front door open slightly behind me, Maeve's silhouette, a silent, watchful presence in the doorway. David didn't notice. This isn't a shack, David, I said, my voice gaining a little strength from the injustice of his description. This is the Saltwood Inn. Your father and I honeymooned here. That gave him pause, but only for a second. What does that have to do with anything? That was 50 years ago. This isn't a vacation, Mom. This is your life. You can't just run away from your problems. I didn't run away from my problems, David. I ran away from the solution you chose for me without my consent. The truth, spoken aloud, as Maeve had said it should be. It hung between us, stark and undeniable. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. The frantic anger in his eyes began to be replaced by a dawning, uncomfortable confusion. He was here to rescue his confused, aging mother, and she wasn't acting confused. She was acting lucid. Terribly, frighteningly lucid. The silence that followed my words was thicker and more profound than any I had experienced on the beach. David just stood there on the step, his shoulders slumping slightly, the wind taken out of his sails of righteous anger. He looked from me, to the N, to the vast, indifferent ocean behind me, and then back at my face, as if seeing me for the first time. Without your consent? He finally echoed, his voice quieter now, laced with genuine confusion. Mom, we talked about it. You agreed it was for the best. We didn't talk, David, I said, the pain of that memory sharp and fresh. You told me. You stood in my living room and you told me you were done. You presented me with brochures for a place I'd never seen, a life I didn't want as a fait accompli. What was I supposed to do? Argue? Beg? Prove to my own son that I was even more of a burden by having a tantrum? The word burden made him flinch. He looked down at his shoes, at the crushed shells beneath them. I didn't mean you were a burden. Didn't you? The question was gentle, but it hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. You saw the stairs, the ice, the quiet. You saw a list of problems to be solved. You didn't see me anymore, David. You saw a liability. He was silent for a long time, the only sound the gentle sigh of the wind and the distant cry of a gull. When he looked up, his eyes were glistening. I was scared, he whispered, the admission seeming to cost him a great effort. After you slipped on the ice, I lay awake at night imagining you falling down those stairs, lying there for days with no one to find you. I thought the gardens was the safe thing, the responsible thing. I know you were scared, I said, my own heart aching for the boy and the man before me. I know you love me, but love isn't about putting someone in a safe box and closing the lid. Your father, my voice caught, but I pressed on. Your father knew that. He knew I needed room to breathe, even if it meant I might stumble. He'd rather have a wife with a skinned knee than one who was a ghost in a perfectly safe room. I gestured to the world around us, the wild cove, the weathered inn, the untamable sea. You thought you were sending me away to be cared for, David, but you were sending me away to be stored, like a piece of furniture you don't have room for anymore. So I chose a different destination. He finally climbed the last few steps and sank into the other rocking chair on the porch, the weight of the world seeming to settle on him. He put his head in his hands. So what is this then? He asked, his voice muffled. Are you moving here? To this inn? Forever? I don't know, I answered honestly. I'm not thinking in terms of forever right now. I'm taking it one tide at a time. I'm here because this place reminds me that I'm more than just a mother or a widow. It reminds me that I'm a person who can still be surprised, who can still learn, who can still create. I gestured towards the open front door, towards the parlor where my sketchbook lay. I've been drawing again, David. He lifted his head, a flicker of genuine surprise in his red-rimmed eyes. Drawing? You haven't done that since your father died. I know. I looked out at the water, the setting sun setting the surface on fire. I thought the color had gone out of the world with him, but it didn't. It was just waiting for me to be quiet enough to see it again. We sat in silence for a while, the two rocking chairs motionless. The confrontation was over. The storm had passed. What was left in its wake wasn't a resolution, but a fragile, raw understanding. He had come to retrieve a version of his mother that no longer existed. He had found instead a woman he had forgotten was there. He had no idea where I was headed when I packed my bags, and now, sitting beside me on this weathered porch, I could see the dawning, humbling realization that he still had no idea. The map he had for my life was obsolete. I was charting a new course, and for the first time, he was being forced to look at the unfamiliar territory. The silence between us was no longer a wall, but a bridge. A fragile, trembling one, but a bridge nonetheless. David finally broke it, his voice rough with emotion. Can I see? He asked, gesturing weakly towards the door. Your drawings? A fresh wave of vulnerability washed over me. Showing my art to John, a kind stranger, was one thing. Showing it to my son, whose opinion had mattered so deeply to me since he was a little boy critiquing my stick figures, was terrifying. But I nodded. All right. We went inside. The parlor was warm, the fire now just embers. My sketchbook lay on the table where I'd left it, open to the page where I'd attempted to capture the storm. It was a chaotic mess of dark washes and angry lines. I saw him look at it, his brow furrowed, and I braced for a polite, dismissive comment. Instead, he was quiet for a long time. Then he slowly turned the pages. He saw the careful, detailed study of the piece of cobalt sea glass, the simple, graceful lines of the gull's feather, the stooped and patient lighthouse. He saw the progression from shaky, uncertain lines to ones with more confidence, more life. He didn't say a word until he reached the most recent page, the one with the beginnings of the green teardrop. The color mixed and waiting. He stopped, his finger gently tracing the edge of the paper. This is really good, Mom," he whispered, and his voice was full of something I hadn't heard in years. Awe. I'd really forgotten you could do this. The simple words undid me. Tears I had been holding back for days, for weeks, for years, finally spilled over. They were not tears of sadness, but of release. He saw it. He saw the library, not just the bent spine. Just then, Maeve emerged from the kitchen. She didn't acknowledge my tears or David's obvious distress. She simply looked at David and said, "You'll stay for dinner. The guest room at the end of the hall is made up. You can't drive back tonight, you're exhausted." It wasn't an offer. It was a decree. David, too weary and emotionally spent to argue, just nodded. "Thank you, ma'am." Dinner was quiet, subdued. Maeve had made a hearty fisherman's stew, and we ate at the kitchen table. David was polite, but he was clearly in a state of shock, his eyes constantly drifting to the window, to the darkening cove, to me. He was trying to reconcile the mother he knew, the one who made pot roast and worried about his cholesterol, with this woman who lived in a creaky old inn by the sea and painted storms. After we helped Maeve with the dishes, David and I found ourselves back on the porch. The night was clear and cold, the sky a breathtaking tapestry of stars undimmed by city lights. The Milky Way was a visible, shimmering smear across the velvet black. "I never see stars like this at home," David said, his voice hushed. "You have to be away from the lights to see them," I replied softly. "You have to be in the dark." He understood the metaphor. I could feel it. We rocked in our chairs for a while, the rhythm a gentle, healing sound. What happens now, Mom? The next morning, the air in the inn felt different. The tension had dissipated, replaced by a tentative, fragile peace. David emerged from the guest room, looking more rested than he had in years, the frantic edge gone from his eyes. He found me in the kitchen, already sipping tea and watching the morning light paint the cove in soft pastels. "Good morning," he said, his voice still carrying a note of caution, as if he were afraid of disturbing the newfound calm. "Good morning," I replied, pushing a mug towards him. "Sleep well?" "Like a rock," he admitted, pouring himself some coffee from the pot Maeve had left. The silence. "It's loud, but in a good way." He hesitated, then asked, Would you show me the beach? Your beach?" And so, after a breakfast of oatmeal and more of Maeve's miraculous bread, we walked down the path together. It was a different journey from my solitary pilgrimages. David walked slowly, matching my pace, his hand hovering near my elbow, not to guide me, but just in case. He didn't speak, just took it in. The scent of the beach roses, the steep drop of the bluff, the breathtaking reveal of the stony crescent of the cove as we reached the bottom. "It's wild," he said, his eyes wide as he took in the expanse of it. "I see why you like it." "It's honest," I said, bending down to pick up a piece of sea-worn brick. "It doesn't pretend to be anything it's not. It's just itself, in all its stormy and serene moods." We walked along the water's edge, the stones clattering under our feet. I showed him my driftwood log. I pointed out the headlands, the lighthouse, the spot where John and I had talked. I was sharing my world with him, not as a curated experience, but as my actual daily life. He listened, really listened, asking questions about the tides, the history of the lighthouse, the kinds of things he'd never thought to ask me before. Then he stopped, looking down at a patch of wet sand. "What's that one?" he asked, pointing to a pale, celery-green piece of glass. "That's a good find," I said, pleased. "That's from a soda bottle, probably from the 40s. It's rarer than the cobalt." He picked it up, turning it over in his palm just as I did with my treasures. "It's smooth," he murmured. "It's hard to believe it was once sharp, broken." "Time and the sea," I said. "They have a way of smoothing even the most broken edges, if you give them long enough." He pocketed the piece, a simple, unthinking gesture that felt more significant than any grand declaration. We walked on, and for the first time, the silence between us was purely comfortable, filled not with unspoken worries, but with the shared experience of a beautiful morning. When it was time for him to leave, the goodbye was nothing like I had feared. There were no arguments, no pleas for me to come home. He just hugged me on the porch, a long, tight hug that felt like a new beginning. "I'll call you tonight," he said. "And Mom, I'm sorry for not seeing you, for not remembering." "It's okay, David," I said. And I meant it. We both forgot for a little while. He got into his car, but before he started the engine, he rolled down the window. "That green one? The special one? You should paint it. I'd really like to see it when it's finished." I nodded, a lump in my throat. "I will." I watched his car disappear down the road, the dust settling slowly behind it. I felt a pang of his absence, but it was the good kind of ache, the kind you feel after a long, honest conversation. He wasn't taking the old me with him. He was leaving and allowing the new me to stay. I went back to my room and picked up the green teardrop from its bowl. I held it to the light, watching the sun ignite its depths. Then I sat down at the small desk by the window, opened my sketchbook to a fresh page, and picked up my pencil. I had a promise to keep. The story wasn't over. It was just entering a new, more beautiful chapter, one where I was both the author and the artist, finally learning to illustrate my own life.